My name is Jen Pekoski. I am the Alliance's RDM project coordinator and meeting host. I'm really glad you are here. We are all very excited for this panel on starting to develop your institutional RDM strategy. It should be a very interesting session. You do have a black Zoom toolbar in front of you, and if you look for the interpretation button, we do have both English and French translation available. You can select that from the toolbar as you choose. Please post any questions for the panelists in the specific Q&A box, please. But we also do have a chat for any comments or potentially for issues that might crop up during our session. Thank you so much. Oops. Oh, my apologies, everybody. Oh dear, when you double up on your slides, look what happens. I do want to give a land acknowledgement to this group, please. I am located on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenaeapewuk, and Chinooktung nations, on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796, and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. As we move on to the main proceedings of our meeting, it is with acknowledgement of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis nations and communities who have been harmed by colonial and unethical research, and of the data sovereignty and research priorities of these nations and communities. We commit to understanding and taking up the Alliance's role in reducing harm and advancing reconciliation in research. I see that some have put their own land acknowledgements in the chat, and I thank you and welcome anybody else that wants to do that to do so. Thank you so much. All right. You briefly saw this a moment ago, but yes, we are working with a code of conduct today. While you can read the whole of the code of conduct here, I want to encourage the fact that we are working to create a safe community space where discriminatory language is not appropriate and harassment is not tolerated. So thank you so much for being here and respectfully engaging as we learn together. All right. All right, so this is why we are here. Indeed. It is for this session on starting to develop your institutional RDM strategy. I want to welcome our panel moderator for today's session. Felicity Taylor, hi Felicity, is Research Data Management Librarian at the University of Ottawa. Felicity, the floor is yours as we get started. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, bonjour à mes collègues francophones. On va avoir une traduction simultanée aujourd'hui, mais je voulais vous saluer dans votre langue. Et si j'ai des collègues franco-ontariens, je vous souhaite une joyeuse journée franco-ontarien. So I'm going to stick in English for the rest of the session because it works better with the simultaneous translation. But thank you very much. And I'm speaking to you today from the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. So I'm speaking from Ottawa. And thank you, Jen, for the gracious introduction. I'm really looking forward to having the panelists who are here to share their very pragmatic experience of developing institutional RDM strategies in their own campus environments. And we also have a member of we also have Suzanne Board with us, who is who's at the Canada Council, so is here to reflect the Tri-Council perspective. So we're going to have two different points of view on the panel. One of them is people who are who are the experts in the domain, who are unrolling the experience on their campus of developing a strategy, and the Tri-Council as the kind of one of the impulses for developing this strategy. So just keep in mind that the two perspectives are slightly different, and one of the tools that the Tri-Council gives to us is a web page that allows institutions, once they've developed their strategies, to post them in a common space so that we can all have access to the strategies as referral documents. And you'll also see how different everybody's strategy is. I have prepared a slide here, which I'm going to show briefly before I ask the panelists to introduce themselves. Jen, if we can switch to the next slide. So the Alliance Research Intelligence Group recently published this very interesting survey that I encourage you to consult. And I'll in a moment, I'll put a link to both the Tri-Council webpage with all the strategies together, and also a link to this research intelligence report. And what this report shows you is kind of a summary of where 92 institutions in Canada are in their institutional development strategy kind of process. So I personally found this very reassuring at U-Ottawa because it helped me understand kind of where we were at in the process. But in asking the panelists to introduce themselves, I'll ask them to speak to kind of two categories that the report looked at. One of them is the type of institution that you're working in and using these report categories. And on the next slide, I'll ask you to briefly summarize kind of where you're at in your strategy development process using this scale of strategy readiness. So with that, I will ask Jennifer to introduce herself.
I have to remember I'm Jennifer today and not Jen. So
I'm going with the label.
That works just fine. Hi, I'm Jennifer Abel. I am the Research Data Management Specialist at the University of Calgary, and I am actually in the office today, which is kind of unusual. And at the University of Calgary, we are currently in the execution phase. We have a draft strategy document, which we're just starting to do some consultation on. So that's very exciting that we're at this stage, but I'm happy to talk about how we started out in this panel today.
Wonderful. And Cécile, est-ce qu'on peut entendre un peu de vous?
Bien sûr. Bonjour à tous. Hi, everyone. So I'm Cécile Podigan, Research Associate at the University of Montreal Hospital Research Center, also expert in health data management and access for researchers and quality improvement expert at the hospital. So in terms of the stage in which we are here at the CHUM, in French, Centre Hospitalier Université de Montréal, we have made a document that was created by almost 40 people through several rounds of consultation. And we are now articulating the path forward through a roadmap that is almost finalized and will be launched this month. So really glad also to go back on the process and share with you what we have found as easy steps, but also challenges in order to develop this strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Cécile. And Jasmine, can we hear from you?
Hello, yes, I'm Jasmine Hoover, and I work at Cape Breton University, where I am the scholarly communications librarian. We got sent home today because of the hurricane, but I am also still in the office. We have about 5,000 students here, so we're a relatively small university, and we are at the execution stage. We've finished our draft, and now it's moving its way up through provost, and then I'm thinking through Senate next. We're not really sure the next steps. Thanks.
Great. And Maddie?
Hello, my name is Maddie Walter. I'm a science and nursing librarian at Langara College. Although recently I have found myself doing some research data management work this past year. Langara College is in Vancouver, BC, and we have about 20,000 students enrolled, and we have a growing applied research center, maybe average size compared to other colleges, but obviously smaller than research centers at university levels. And we focus mostly on doing applied research that involves working with industry partners. And at this point, I would say we've completed most of the initial stage, and we're starting to move into the planning and visioning stage, perhaps a little bit farther behind than some other panelists here, but that's where we are so far. And currently we're working on just finalizing a survey along with other colleges in BC that we're going to distribute to get a better sense of the kind of data that that's being collected at different institutions.
Excellent, thank you. And Suzanne, do you want to say hello?
I'll say hello, but I can't share my video. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
I'm being prevented from sharing my video by the host.
Well, it's not intentional.
It's okay. It's quite all right.
I just want to resolve that for you.
Thank you for this opportunity to be here. Thanks to the Alliance for organizing this, and for the network of excellence of experts for producing all of the many resources that are available to institutions. I'm glad to be here. I'm really curious and thrilled to hear about how efforts are underway across the country, but also how a community of practice is growing to address and improve sort of research data management capacity in Canada. So I'm here with my ears open, and also happy to take any questions regarding the policy, excuse me, and its drivers, its intentions, and maybe some of the even more specific. I can open my camera now, I think. There, hi. Some of the specific questions that you might that institutions are encountering as they go down this path. So thanks for this opportunity.
All right, well, thank you to all of our panelists. And before before we open the floor with some questions, I just want to kind of do some housekeeping, because I'm seeing questions in the Q&A that have to do with how the chat and the Q&A will function. So I wonder if we can have Jen kind of step back in here and give us some instructions on how people from the audience should be communicating with us. And then also a question about sharing the slides. So these are the only slides that you'll see during the presentation, and I really just encourage you to go to the link that takes you to the survey, because then you'll get the slides in the context.
Hi everyone, I'm back here. Certainly the slides can be made available. Can be made available after the session. And then in the background, in a couple of moments, we'll work on enabling the chat. Otherwise, the Q&A is open to posting questions for the panelists. Thanks so much. And Felicity, I will stop sharing now also. Thank you.
Okay. Super. So the way that we've sort of structured this is I have 4 questions that I'll kind of pose to the panelists. This will give us a better idea of how their experiences are different and also similar to each other in the institutional strategy planning process. And then we can move to a Q&A, if the panelists want to ask each other questions, or if there's questions that come from the Q&A session, box, or if the chat's enabled from the chat, we'll keep an eye on that as well. So panelists. Oh, and also I can do like around the room, everybody say something on the panel, but I'm also a big fan of just spontaneous conversation if we can make it happen in the Zoom room. So feel free to kind of, I don't want to say like crosstalk each other, but speak if we can hit a conversational role, I think that will be really enjoyable for everyone. So looking back at the process, the institutional strategy planning process in your institutions, where did you start, and did you get easy wins or any successes you want to share?
I can start if no one else would like to. So we started, when I arrived back in December of 2021, there were plans underway to set up a steering committee and a working committee. Those hadn't been set up yet. So the idea was there. We knew who the co-chairs would be, and it was going to be co-chaired by folks from the Vice President Research Office and the Ed Libraries and Cultural Resources. At the senior leadership level for the steering committee, and at the managerial level, director level for the working committee. So when I came in, it was, okay, so we're going to do this and we need you to figure out how this is going to work for us. So things like terms of reference and things like that, and resources that we should use. So that took us a bit of time to get that set up. So I started on December 6th of last year. And the first steering committee meeting was on April 6th. So there was a 4-month lag. The good thing about that was that it gave me a lot of time to get to know different people who were going to be involved in the process. So we have people on the steering and working committees from the Research Services Office, Libraries and Cultural Resources, IT in particular, Research Computing Services, Research Ethics, legal and privacy, both in the Research Services Office and in the Cummings School of Medicine. Faculty of Graduate Studies, the Graduate Student Association, and the Postdoc Association. So we have a lot of people involved. And I was able to get to meet them before we really started in earnest. And it was also just with the working committee, we were able to do a little bit of work before that first steering committee meeting, so that when we were ready to start, and we started with a current state assessment, we could hit the ground running because everybody had a reasonable idea of what we were going to do. I had a good lay of the landscape, so I could give some direction to people. So once we did get started in earnest, things moved really quickly. But those 4 months of laying the groundwork wound up being pretty important. And I was well, new to the university this time around. I'd been here many years ago. So perhaps with someone who was internal, it might have been a little bit easier to have those relationships from the start. But for me, it was really important to be able to get that set up before we started.
Thanks, Jen. Does that experience resonate with anybody else on the panel, or do you want to share?
I can share if you want, because we also organized the steering committee around March 2021, a committee formed of directors of the hospital, but with a great representation of the research center. So director of training, director of quality improvement, director of IT at the hospital. And we made the choice not only to develop a strategy for research data, but health data. And there was a reason for this, because in Quebec, we knew that the great law changes were coming in terms of protection of personal data. For example, the law project 64 that was passed and begins in application this month. That's why, even though we knew that through the tricultural policy, we had to produce a strategy for GDR, actually wanted a strategy at the scale of the health center for all health data. So it was a kind of a choice, not an easy move, but in the end, it really paid because everyone was involved and sensitized to the importance of developing new policies for health data management. And concretely, on March 2021, we organized this steering committee for the health data strategy made with directors, but we knew that it would not work on drafting the strategy or consulting the stakeholders. So we organized 8 working groups that we call the sous-comité that were really responding directly to the big committee, but were coordinating by myself and the adjunct director in health data science with Dr. Michael Chassé at the research center. And these 8 subcommittees, to tell you a bit what they were doing. One was about cybersecurity, the other about training, the third about transfer to external partners, another one about patient and public engagement, another one whose mission was to categorize the types of health data and data uses, and so on. And the great challenge was coordinating all these subcommittees, but I was in charge of sitting in any of them, and they had the main mission to establish their objectives and their main recommendation that should be introduced within the GREAT strategy. So from April 2021 to December 2021, they really had this mission to produce their recommendations. And I will stop after this. They drafted 122 recommendations, which asked for really kind of Delphi questionnaire that we prepared in order to reduce this recommendation and prioritize them, thanks to the help of experts, but also of the larger members and participants of the hospital and research center. So that was the start, and I will stop this because it's at the beginning of the story.
I have a quick win that kind of relates to those, I guess, because we're at a small institution. Our committee was very small. It was about 7 people. It was really easy to just, grab somebody from each school, a member from research, somebody from IT. So that was definitely a quick win for us. When we were working on ours, we knew who to ask. We didn't have any trouble like finding meeting times or anything like that. And we were able to work pretty quickly and efficiently. So that was the one benefit of being a small university.
I have another benefit to being a small institution, especially one that it doesn't have a very large applied research center. It's very easy to assess the current state of RDM at your institution when you aren't really doing anything to begin with. That made it quite easy. We didn't really have any existing support for that, so that stage wasn't too difficult assessing what we're currently doing. Maybe I'll just talk about how we started as well. The first step, like I said, we didn't have any existing services, so it was really a lot of learning, especially on my part, learning about what is to be expected, about how RDM even works. I tried attending a few seminars, finding supportive resources online, but I would say that unfortunately at the college level, it didn't always feel like it was specifically made for us. A lot of it seemed like it could have been more useful for universities, but we did find a few college resources eventually. I also found it really helpful to make connections with others in the same situation. So myself and a few other college librarians and research chairs formed a committee that's meeting monthly, so we can direct each other, collaborate where we can, that sort of thing. That was probably one of the most helpful places in getting everything started. And then as a librarian, just doing what I know how to do best. I think that data management plans and repositories are I felt more comfortable with that, but also creating online information guides, surveys, organizing things, just starting with things that could give me confidence to keep going forward when I felt a bit out of my element.
Thanks, everyone. There's some really, I see you want to have something, but there's 3 kind of really great questions in the Q&A that I want to put out there. So Jen, did you want to say something before I do that?
I was just going to say, there are times when being in a small institution sounds lovely. We didn't have as many people on our committee as Cecile did. We had, I guess, 14, no, maybe 16 on the working committee. And then, okay, so maybe if you combine the 2, it's like 40 people, but all over the place, and trying to schedule people for meetings, and everybody had different levels of knowledge. So, there were some people who were like, yeah, RDM, no problem. And there were other people who were like, what do you want me to do on this committee? Why are we doing this? So it was a lot of work to get everyone up to speed, and even just to get everyone in the same Zoom room. So I know there are people at smaller institutions going, but we don't have any resources. Like, that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's a really good position to be in because you can create it quickly together.
Yeah, super interesting landscape where the size of the institution and like the ability of the different parts of the institutions to communicate with each other has a huge impact. So there was a question for Cecile about your process at SHIM. And you may have already addressed it, but I want to ask it again because I think it merits asking, because I know we're struggling with it at UOttawa with our medical faculty and our affiliated researchers in the hospitals. And I imagine other universities who have this structure are asking the same questions as well, or will ask the same questions. So the way that I understand the question is, were any university RDM representatives involved in the process, assuming that many SHIM researchers are associated with universities? So the way that I understand this question is, was there an RDM librarian or somebody from the research office or somebody employed like at the universities that the SHIM researchers are affiliated with in your planning process, involved in your planning process? How are those links made?
Okay, I will answer the question, and I think it's a really good question. We had no RDM strategy expert from the University of Montreal sitting in the committee, but for sure we were in contact with the Vice Rectorate of the University of Montreal, which is actually drafting its own strategy. And this is where maybe there is a disconnection in a way. We should harmonize strategy, but as we were in contact, they were aware that we were working on a strategy targeting the specific case of health data and sensitive data about themselves, but we wanted to be sure to have harmonized directing principles for drafting the strategy. So getting in contact, but this was an issue, of course, the question of harmonization between institutions. It's much broader than what I presented. And to respond to the second part of the question, we had RDM experts, not from the university, but from our own library at the hospital, because we have librarians that are experts in the management of data, in the diffusion of data, in the analysis of publications by our own researchers who are also affiliated to the University of Montreal. But I think this question is really accurate because as we are all drafting our own strategy, there will be a moment when communication will be most important in order to ensure that researcher that goes to an institution and will not be imposed conditions that are totally different from another institution in terms of health data management or data management, larger point of view.
Yeah, thank you. That's really clear. That's really clear. Thank you very much. And there's another question for you, which is, and then I'm going to get to the third kind of question, Ifina, is like the really difficult question about resourcing. But Cecile, a question of, can you please share the main objectives of the 8 working groups if possible?
Okay, so maybe there are the themes on which they were working. I have shared in the chat a presentation, a webinar that we did. There was Laval University, McGill University, and the SHIM presenting their strategy, and I will refer people to them because they are the defining team of every subcommittee, and that could really help for people to discover what they were doing. I think that one maybe lesson for a hospital that is starting and needs to invite people to this committee, because you can want to do a cybersecurity working group in your organization, but whom to invite? And a challenge for us was to gather people who were experts in cybersecurity, but working separately. Can give an example. There were cybersecurity experts from the research center, from our data lake, Citadel, but also from the IT section of the hospital. And it's sometimes really difficult to join them, people with different missions, attending to different stakeholders. Another subcommittee was really important, the one on legal issues. The subcommittee was in charge of assessing what were the new laws, the laws applying to health data management and so on. And we gathered the lawyers from the research center working on contracts for research, the lawyers for quality improvement, lawyers that deal with innovation projects. I think the main challenge is when you want to form this working group in a way that they know what to produce and what's expected from them. So I don't want to take so much of the conversation today, but this is one a main challenge.
Thank you. So this is great because we started with, what are your successes and easy wins as a question because we didn't want to scare everybody away from the webinar. So thanks for sticking with us. and now we're going to move into the crunchy part, which is, were there areas that you found particularly challenging, and if so, what caused the challenges? And I feel like we've already sort of transitioned into this mode, but I want to just go to the Q&A and keep kind of feeding you the questions from the audience because I think that they hit all of these key points. But I encourage you as well, if in responding to the questions from the audience, you want to make kind of a lateral leap into a challenge area that hasn't been raised yet, but that you think is pertinent, please feel free to do so. So there's a question which is, was anybody promised, the wording of the question is really interesting. Was anybody promised and or provided with additional resources to develop and deliver this strategy? Extra staff, money, etc. So this is a really great question. I want to acknowledge that some of you were hired specifically for the purpose of the strategy. And I think we should make that clear because that's FTE for strategy, new FTE for strategy. And then some of you had it kind of like put on your desk. And that's a very different, that's a workload allocation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that other workload was removed. So I think, if we could get into the nuances of where is the FTE coming from, I think that would be really helpful for people. Or how's that negotiated, like at your institutions? I think that could be really helpful for people. And then if there are examples on the panel or even in the audience, because I think like if anybody has experience in the audience, it's valid too, of successfully advocating for like additional FTE once the institutional strategy working committee or steering committees have been formed. I think those are really, really helpful lessons learned.
So I'm going to jump in here because I know when you say some people were hired specifically to work on the strategy. Yes, I was specifically hired to work on the strategy. But I am not included in the operating budget at the moment. Mine is a grant funded position through an incremental project grant from the Research Support Fund. It's a 3-year grant. It ends on March 31st of 2024. We don't currently have anything in the operating budget for an RDM specialist beyond that. What we're doing right now in parallel with working on our strategy is working on a business case, because we know that there is going to need to be additional support in a number of areas. So IT has a number of asks for mostly for hardware, but also for an additional position. The Research Services Office has an ask for my position to be funded beyond 2024, but also to have another person, another FTE who can help with, as we find out about things like compliance, helping with DMPs and grants and things like that, general support. And the library is also asking for 2 FTEs. Right now we have a 0.5 librarian who is mostly working on DMPs, but the library knows they're going to need at least one more FTE librarian, RDM librarian, to sort of oversee things, as well as an FTE librarian focusing on data curation. And eventually there's going to need to be support for long-term preservation, which is going to cost money. So we are working on our budget ask right now, which is going to be going through slightly different channels than the strategy is, because that's probably going to have to work its way more up to the executive leadership team to say, we need to do this. We're right now, it's like, it would be, having the strategy is going to be important, but if we can't actually support it, then it will be mostly a box ticking exercise, and that won't be useful.
Right, I guess this is a drawback to having a small the university is that, yeah, they're not going to hire a full-time person to work on data management. It's not even in my job title. And we also kind of wrote our strategy to put the work on the researchers. So, you know, you're responsible for managing your data. Here's how we can support you. Here's what we need to do to support you. But yeah, I've never seen an offer from the university to kind of get a job to support this. And I think eventually that's going to be a problem. But for now, so far it's been okay. We've had, you know, people in the research office helping with the ethics, and I'm just there to help them consult with their EMPs and stuff like that. So we'll see how long that lasts.
I feel like I'm in a similar situation, Jasmine. There is no, it's work right now that I'm mostly doing off the side of my desk. It's not part of my job description officially. When I have time, you know, I try to fit that in and get as much time as possible. I think that I think I'm probably moving into a situation where that may be officially part of my role, but it's still, we're not really hiring anybody else. I guess there's possibility for some release time, but that would be the extent of it. And I think that's quite common in a college and maybe small university environment. With the working group that I have amongst colleges across BC, it seems like a pretty common situation that you just don't dedicate too much extra resource towards that, because it's a small research department, but also it's just not really possible. I will say, and add another challenge that I think a lot of colleges are specifically facing, is that often that we're doing applied research with industry partners, and then there's questions about data ownership. Maybe a lot of them will work with us because you know, I guess there's some confidentiality to their data and they want to keep ownership of that. And how is that going to change our communication with them and our contracts with them about us wanting to actually do something with that data going forward and keeping it in certain places? So I think the industry component is an interesting one that's posing a few challenges for us right now.
Yeah, exactly. Just to respond to what Maddie said, we thought it was so important to reflect on collaboration with industry that we had a working group on that. And also because we have many requests and an increasing number of requests for data access from industry in partnership with a researcher, but for algorithm training. And these kind of questions can really be really difficult to solve. And this is connected with the expertise, because we had no resources, no additional resources to finance the drafting of the strategy, the implementation of the strategy. I would say that this is a challenge for research data management, but imagine when you have a new law coming that says that you need to do privacy assessment for any transfer of data for research purpose. This is actually happening in Quebec right now. This kind of lack of resources is really tragic. And I think there is an advocacy to make. I don't know at which level, but we cannot produce any more policy for data management without supporting institutions. Not everyone would have the chance to have an expert inside or a grant to hire a new expert in this field. So many institutions are just struggling with cybersecurity and these kind of questions around data diffusion, valorization. It becomes a tipping moment where institutions are just saying, okay, am I going to comply or not, and when?
So thank you, everyone. And I wonder if this is I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Suzanne, but I'm going to do it. So I also want to acknowledge, and maybe Jen, I'm going to put you on the spot as well. And you know, you're in the background, but you're there. So we have two federal level organizations that are involved in the RDM space, or are producing the RDM space. We have the tri-agency. I called it Trans-Council before, but it's tri-agency apparently. And we have the Alliance. And the Alliance is new, and we're still figuring ourselves out. But can we try to address perhaps this question that everybody is asking, which is there going to be money from the federal level, like there is to support cybersecurity and other initiatives?
Sure, I'll take that easy question. Thank you. No, it's
My job.
I know. No, thanks. I actually am struck by a few things here. One is, well, just a note of that, you know, Jennifer shared where the funding for a position comes from. It comes from a federal grant. It comes from the Research Support Fund. Thanks for sharing that, Jennifer. And I'm pleased to hear that institutions are using those incremental project funds for that type of thing. Now, that's not available to all institutions. It's very limited. It's not a solution that that can meet the needs across the country. So I acknowledge that as well. I would point to just the very fact of that the institutions across Canada are being mobilized right now to look at what the gaps are, to see the needs, to articulate that in a institutional strategy helps make those business cases. So if we identify where the gaps are across Canada, you know, we can imagine a year from now, we'll have a set of institutional strategies that can make a pretty strong case at different levels for where new significant investments need to be made. So this is not sort of perhaps the message that you're hoping to hear, but I think that the fact that we are doing these strategies, identifying those gaps, can actually take the community a long way to making that case. So I think that's what I'll offer for now. Something else that I'll take the actually opportunity to plug SSHRC's connection grants. Of course, very small funding, not they don't help you necessarily with your long-term FTE needs, but for smaller term engagements where universities might want to invest some resources in engaging in events or workshops to help the community develop RDM capacity and practices. We do have these small connection grants offered through SSHRC to do exactly that. So again, not a big term, not a system-wide solution, but some resources that are available.
Thanks, Suzanne. I think that kind of covers. I'm mindful of time, so I want to kind of move off the resource question into other areas that are just as punchy and important to consider when you begin the process, because I'm bringing it back to the theme of today, which is how to develop your institutional strategy. There's 2 more sessions after this that will kind of get into these questions in a more deep way, and I encourage you to follow the entire series. But what I'm hearing is that, and this is certainly what I saw in my institution too, like the strategy development process parallels a business case building process. And there isn't necessarily I don't think there's a workbook or a resource that tells you to do it that way, but it's a smart approach.
I would even say that the strategy development process catalyzes the changes at the university, at the institution. The challenge is to actually get that working in practice and not just in theory. And I think that's the challenge that everyone's facing now.
Yeah, very, which is why this series is so interesting. We have so many things to talk about. So just going back to the questions in the Q&A, we have another really interesting question that I think is important to ask at the development stage, which is what degree of Indigenous representation you're able to create in your strategy building process. Have you built those relationships in the past? Are they available to you in this particular moment? Or are they something that you're going to have to start building as part of your strategy process? And how do you create culture change at that level in order to be able to pursue a strategy process that's going to respond to the TRC calls of action and take Indigenous data sovereignty seriously in the process that puts the policies into place, the strategies and policies into place. So I have experience at my own institution of this, and I kind of feel like you probably all have your own experiences. And I will just say from the beginning that usually the experience is a lot of institutional self-reflection. So to begin with, there's no easy answer to this. Everybody's struggling with it. And I just want to create like kind of a safe space where we can talk a little bit about what that feels like and looks like in this institutional strategy process, if you're comfortable sharing.
So I'm lucky that on our steering committee, we have the Vice Provost and Associate Vice President of Research for Indigenous Engagement, Michael Hart. And we, on our working committee, we have had, so we have an Indigenous research support team in the VPR office, which was unfortunately really understaffed for the last number of months. So we had the one member of that team on our working committee, and they've now just hired a new manager for that team. So we're going to be onboarding her into the process. So it's been great to have those people involved. The challenge is that even though we have an Indigenous strategy at UCalgary, it in itself is still a work in progress. And where we're at right now is, I would say, and in all the discussions I'm having, I'm saying that we are at the beginning of the discussions about this. And what we are really doing with the strategy and with the work on the strategy is laying the groundwork so that we can have these fuller discussions about what needs to happen going forward. Nothing we do in our strategy is going to be the be all and end all for what's going to happen. It's all the beginning of the discussion. We had a chance to talk to the Indigenous Scholars Circle last week. And again, very much the beginning of the discussion, introducing them to, as we are with a lot of faculty, is introducing them to the idea of RDM and how it works in different areas. So, but having those conversations and establishing a process for working forward and going forward in a good way is really crucial. So I'm learning a lot, and I hope that I'm listening and creating the space that's necessary to have those discussions, while at the same time being able to provide the context in which all of this is working. Because there are reasons why all of these things are happening. It's not just, randomly we got a tri-agency policy. There's reasons for this to be happening. So trying to bring all those things together. So yeah, it is a challenge, but it is definitely an important challenge and a worthwhile one to be tackling.
Here in Nova Scotia, we have Mi'kmaq Ethics Watch, which is, researchers need to go through that application in order to do research. And so our plan here, once we get this person hired, we haven't had anybody in that position for over a year. They're working on it. So our plan to work with the data is either to incorporate a few questions from the DMP in the Mi'kmaq Ethics Watch application, just so they aren't repeating themselves, and just work closely with that existing process so we're not causing any trouble with it. And we did consult with them and showed them our plan, and they helped us edit it a bit too. So overall, just trying to work with an existing process and how they recommend dealing with data.
As far as sorry, Maddie, you can go on. Oh, okay, thank you. As far as the SHUM is concerned, we, as I told you, we established this subcommittee for public and patient engagement, and it was led by our Center of Excellence in partnership with the patient and the public. We call the CEPPP at the SHUM Research Center, and it goes into contact and collaboration with the Center for the Governance of the Information of the First Nations. And someone at this center really helps us to make training and propose a sensitization to the OCAP principles and to the CARE principles, which are complementary with the FAIR ones. They are present in the strategy of the Free Council. And what was really interesting for this conversation is that the person from this Center for the Information and Governance of the Data of the First Nations was really discovering how we were doing patient and public engagement. So there was a real exchange of and teachings about how to engage in research, what we are doing about transparency, about consultation, participation, the collaboration, the horizontal view. I think there was a lot of discussions, but did really remain at the scale of a subgroup. And a main challenge, as Jennifer said, is passing from what we draft, what we want to implement, and how we talk with the community of the researchers. From my point of view, it's still a challenge how to develop this kind of sensitization to the specificities of the governance principles for First Nation data. We are really at the beginning of this kind of conversation implementation. Right now, every member of the personnel at the SHUM needs to follow a training, a webinar on the governance principle for health data for First Nation, Métis, and Inuits. I see it on my screen every morning, but for me, it's just really the beginning. You know, it's much more than that. And we feel that there is a great space to fill, but I think it could really be helped by the centers, the institutions that represent the communities and could support institutions like hospitals, but also universities in implementing training, sensitization, implementation of these governance principles for health data management.
And at Langara College, I don't think we've quite reached the point yet to make those relationships. It's been hard enough getting anybody to join the working group here. So I feel like currently it's mostly the people who are most actively involved in the strategy, and then involving sort of stakeholders as needed, because you know, for example, the Indigenous education and services here, they would deal with pretty much anything. So they're quite stretched thin, I think, as it is. So trying to involve people at the time when it's most needed and with as little or as much involvement as they would like, I think that's probably going to be how it goes, but it's probably I think it's a little early at this point. And then I think we'd also want to see if any of our industry partners, maybe that we've currently worked with or have worked with in the past, have any involvement with Indigenous data. I don't think so at this point, but that'll be another avenue that we'll look at. And I will say too that I recently completed the OCAP course, which I think was just a really great course. So I would recommend that to anyone who is interested.
Thank you, everybody, for sharing your experience, reciprocal relations, meeting via highway. And what we're hearing in these examples is, sorry, my connection's unstable, of course, right now. But so what I'm hearing in these examples is both like the non-Indigenous institution and the people who are really driving the RDM policy and strategy are primarily not like overwhelmingly non-Indigenous, right? And so whatever training you can take to familiarize yourself with the perspective of the Indigenous data owners before entering into the conversation is extremely it is our responsibility. And then the other part of it is recognizing that there are Indigenous researchers, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and then like global Indigenous researchers that are working in the Canadian research space. And they have their own practices and engagements with data and computational methodologies, and they know what they're doing. And so eventually we'll meet them and be able to have these conversations. So we have 5 minutes left in the session, and I see, we have 5 minutes left in the session, and I just wonder, Jen, if there's any wrap up that you want to do, or if I could sort of send out a wrap up question. So I'm asking Jen for direction here.
Certainly, we can, if you want to do a wrap-up question around the group quickly, and then I can end with a reminder of panel 2 and panel 3. So I'll throw it back to you, Felicity.
Excellent. So the wrap-up question I want to ask is, do you have any advice? And I think this will kind of like address broadly some of the questions that have been that have not yet been asked in the Q&A. But so, do you have any advice for people here today who might just be beginning the process? And what do you wish you knew when you started?
I think it's all about conversations to start, going and talking to people in the institution and in the community as well. I mean, the RDM community is a really great group of people, and reach out just to get to know what people are doing, what they know about RDM, what they see as needs. So, you know, now we can often meet in person and go for a coffee or something and have a chat. So have those conversations to start, and then you can build up from there.
I would say that I didn't find it that onerous or difficult. There's a good template that was created by experts that we used. A lot of the resources are already there through the Alliance. And so, you know, we relied heavily on those. And I just found it really kind of fun to go through, actually. So don't be scared to start it, basically.
I would advise to consult with partners, because we organized a webinar in order to share our processes really in an open-minded way, and it really helped to see if we were on the right track or not. And another thing that I would have made differently and doing this all year would be, when you set up a committee, make a roadmap for the committee. Because with specific instructions of what expecting from people and when, not in an authoritarian view, but actually to really clarify the mandate of everyone, because that was the main question asked to me every time the group was meeting, is what should we do? So I think it's kind of clear the way, and every time people would not have sufficient resource or time to involve in this, but being grateful for what people have to offer is a really good start.
And for my advice, I would echo the finding connections, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed. Finding a group of people who are in a similar situation was one of the most helpful things I think that I did. So, and if you're in BC and a college or a small institution, we have a group like that which is going, so you're welcome to reach out. And I'd say also that I think just knowing that it's okay to have your goal, like your future goal being to comply with the policy. I think we're currently at that point. We don't have to achieve, you know, the most amazing RDM support ever in Canada. I think it's okay to have a realistic goal there as well. And that took a bit of pressure off when I started thinking about that.
Suzanne, is there anything that you wish people would know at the beginning of the process?
Well, I think what Maddie was just articulating, and is that something to remember, is that the point of having a strategy is not to actually already match your goals in the strategy. The strategy is to identify where the gaps are and where your institution wants to move, directionality, as opposed to wanting to demonstrate that you are practicing the best, some kind of gold standard of RDM practice in your institution already. That's not what that's for, but sometimes it can be very daunting. So I think Maddie's advice there is really, I think, something to take to heart.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming, both the audience with their amazing questions and the panelists for their insightful answers. And Jen, I'll pass it over to you to close the session.
Thank you so much, Felicity, and thank you to you for your moderation skills. This is wonderful. We do have 2 other panels coming up this fall. Panel 2, working through the planning stages, and panel 3, working through the drafting stages of developing an institutional RDM strategy. If you scroll up in the chat, the links are there, or they're also available on the Alliance's events page and calendar. So thank you again to everyone for coming. for being so thoughtful and open and contributing. We're all grateful for this wonderful community that creates amazing things. So thank you very much to everyone again. I look forward to joining you later on in the fall. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.